In the deep territory of 19th century Mexico, Luz Maria Alvarado, a woman without an illustrious family name or a figure accepted by the era's beauty standards, received a letter of agreement. A ranch owner had chosen her to become his wife by correspondence. But upon arriving at the hacienda, all she found was contempt. She was rejected for being too heavy, returned as if her value could be measured by her silhouette. That day, no one imagined that a widower marked by loss would see her as no one had dared to see her before. He saw the heart capable of saving his home. The salty harbor breeze slipped through the window crack, carrying the scent of seaweed and distant seas. This mixed with the warm perfume of freshly baked bread. In the modest adobe kitchen of a house in Calado, Luz Maria Alvarado pulled the last pieces of her trade from the oven. They were golden, round rolls shaped by her hands, as if each contained a silent prayer. She placed them on a clean linen cloth, knowing this daily gesture would not be repeated. That would be her last dawn in Veracruz, in the year of 1875. Luz Maria was not a fragile or discreet woman. Her height made her imposing, and her generous figure did not go unnoticed in a world that still measured a lady's worth by the delicacy of her form. Her face, however, radiated a comfort that disarmed anyone who paused to look at her sincerely. She had soft cheeks, serene eyes, and a constant expression of tenderness that time had failed to wear away. With her hands still warm from the dough, she sat by the windowsill. On the table, a letter folded with care, with a seal she had caressed dozens of times, rested like a sacred object. The sender, Don Prudencio Aguayo, a ranch owner from Santa Clara del Llano, wrote with straight, unadorned calligraphy. She had read those lines so many times she knew them by heart. I desire a woman who will share my house and my days, who respects silence and understands duty. He did not mention love or tenderness, only a promise of shelter and a name. For Luz Maria, that was enough. She sold her iron stove, the embroidered sheets from her mother, and a pair of antique earrings that had been her only luxury. She stored the few remaining items in her trunk. They were a notebook with her own thoughts, a book with loose pages, a pair of clean dresses, and the patchwork quilt her mother had sewn when they still lived in the Sierra. At sunrise, she boarded the train. The steam whistle broke the harbor's calm like a wordless farewell. Through the window, she watched the rooftops recede, the dark lanterns, the walls damp with mist. She did not cry. Her soul was tight in her chest, but she did not cry. She did not cry when the train left the cane fields behind, nor when the first shadows of the mountain covered the landscape. She only closed her eyes and listened to her firmest thought. I did not come into the world to be small for anyone. The journey was long, the rattling of the car, the smell of aged leather, the stops at stations where she knew no one. With every passing hour, Luz Maria wondered if, at the other side of the journey, someone would pronounce her name with respect. On the third day of travel, the train stopped at a small station with a wooden platform and a red roof. It was flanked by 2 posts with dark lanterns. The sign, faded by the rain, read, Santa Clara del Llano. She carefully lowered the trunk with one hand and the folded quilt over her arm. The air was dry and the wind carried dust. Around her, an earthy silence covered everything. There were no flowers, and no one was waiting for her. She waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. A carriage drove past. A young man nodded his head but did not stop. 3 children ran after a rooster amidst laughter. The station clock marked the hour he had promised to be there, and then, from the shadow of a shed, an older man emerged. He had a weathered face and a straw hat. He approached with a firm step and a low gaze until he stopped in front of her. Señorita Alvarado? Yes, Don Prudencio Aguayo sent me for you. Please, get in. During the journey, Luz Maria tried to ask him about the hacienda, about the owner, about life in Santa Clara, but the man barely replied with single words. The landscape changed as they advanced from reddish earth to maguey fields. Beyond, a grand house with white walls, stone corridors, and century-old oak trees rose imposingly, crowning the horizon. Upon reaching the main courtyard, several workers stopped what they were doing to observe her. The wheels stopped. Luz Maria carefully descended. Her heart pounded so hard she felt the beats in her throat. From the hacienda's portico, a man in a dark suit, rigid posture, and severe expression watched her. He did not come down to greet her. He did not offer his hand. He only looked at her from head to toe without pretense. Luz Maria held his gaze, standing tall, swallowing the uncertainty. A light murmur among the employees cut the silence. Don Prudencio took a step forward. The afternoon light fell upon his shoulders as if even the sun hesitated to touch him. "It is not what I expected." That was all. Not one word more. He turned on his heel and went into the house, leaving behind only the echo of his contempt. Luz Maria remained standing with the quilt in her arms. She was surrounded by strangers who did not know whether to approach or look away. And as the wind began to lift the dust from the road, she knew, without need of explanation, that she had been discarded like an empty box. The road back to the town was longer than the outward journey. This was not because of the distance, but because of the weight, not of the trunk, nor the quilt, but of the silence that hung between Luz Maria and the man guiding the cart. The same man who had collected her with respect at the station now did not know where to place his gaze. No one had asked him to speak. No one had given him explanations. There was only a dry order from the hacienda threshold. "Take her back to the town." Luz Maria did not ask questions. She sat where she was placed, with her back straight and her dignity gathered as if it were a shawl worn to prevent trembling. The sun descended slowly between the trees, and the dirt roads began to fill with shadow. The town of Santa Clara del Llano was small, with low houses and streets of irregular stone. In the central plaza, a dry fountain resisted the dust. Next to it, a group of women washed clothes in silence. As she passed, some lifted their eyes. It was not curiosity. It was recognition, as if they already knew who she was, though they had never seen her. When the cart stopped in front of Señor Mateo Villaseñor's pharmacy, the employee lowered the trunk without a word. He made a brief gesture with his head, got back on, and disappeared among the streets. Luz Maria was left alone with the trunk at her feet and the quilt in her arms, as if she had just arrived in a world that was not expecting her. She took a deep breath. She knew that crying would not help, nor would shouting. The only resource she had left was not to fall apart. She pushed open the pharmacy door, where the air smelled of dry leaves, medicinal alcohol, and soaps wrapped in paper. Behind the counter, a man with a white beard and round lenses was reading with a furrowed brow. "Can I help you with something?" he asked without lifting his gaze. "I'm looking for a place to spend the night," she replied without lowering her voice. Don Mateo looked at her. Then he truly saw her. Her firm posture, the quilt held close to her chest, and those serene eyes that, even trembling inside, did not beg for charity, only for a corner. He did not ask for her story. He only pointed to the stairs in the back. "I have a room upstairs. It is not large, but it is clean. If it suits you, you may stay tonight." Luz Maria nodded. When she went up the stairs and opened the door, she found a tiny space, a narrow bed, a wobbly side table, and a window with a wooden frame that creaked in the wind. She sat on the edge of the mattress, opened her trunk, and left the folded quilt aside. It was as if, by not spreading it out, she might also cover herself in courage. The next morning she went down to the market with the little funds she had left. She bought flour, a little cinnamon, a dozen eggs, and a small piece of lard. That afternoon, in the pharmacy's back kitchen, she kneaded with firm hands and a contained soul. She lit the old oven with dry firewood, and soon the air filled with the aroma of her childhood. It was not much, but it was hers. That same afternoon, she placed the rolls in a clean basket and walked to the plaza. She chose a corner near the well and spread a cloth over an overturned box. She sat there with her back straight, without announcing her product, without pleading. She simply waited. Some passed by, others looked at her sideways. One or two bought, more out of curiosity than hunger. A woman with a bony face and tight lips stopped in front of her stand without looking at the bread. She spoke quietly to another, but not quietly enough. "That is the one who was rejected," she murmured. Luz Maria heard it. She did not blink. She did not lower her gaze. She only took a clean napkin and delicately covered the rolls she had left, as if wrapping a jewel. That night, she baked again. This was not because she had sold much, but because the oven was the only thing that did not judge her. The flour under her nails was her way of saying, "I am here." When the last batch was ready, she stood alone in the kitchen's gloom. Her hands were still warm from the work, and her heart was more tempered than the night. Then she remembered something her mother used to tell her while they kneaded together in distant days. "What comes from your hands will always return." And as she extinguished the lamp, Luz Maria thought that perhaps, even though the world had rejected her hands still knew how to make a home. Luz Maria Alvarado's name drifted through the streets of Santa Clara del Llano. It moved like dry leaves when the wind blows without haste, without a fixed course, but with a certain destiny. The rolls she sold in the plaza were not the only thing that drew attention. Her serene bearing, her face without the makeup of sorrow, and that way of walking as if she owed nothing to anyone, stirred more than one restless tongue. The rumor soon reached the ears of Doña Brigida, the housekeeper of Hacienda San Remigio. She was a woman of grave voice, a perpetual frown, and a gaze that could distinguish between appearance and substance. She had served the Castañeda y del Valle family for more than 3 decades, and though her words were few, her opinion held weight. "We do not need a saint," she said one morning in the hacienda kitchen. "Only someone who knows how to read, sew, and is not afraid of silence." That was how Luz Maria received a visit from a young servant with a brief note. The letter did not bear a signature, but it included an appointment. To present herself at Hacienda San Remigio the following day, at dawn. The carriage that took her was simple. It was pulled by a pair of tired horses and driven by a groom of few words. As they moved away from the town, the landscape grew greener, but also lonelier. There were gentle hills, cultivated fields dormant in the cold, and in the distance the silhouette of a house that seemed out of this world. Hacienda San Remigio emerged like a forgotten postcard. Tall walls of light quarry stone, wrought iron balconies, thick columns, and a bell tower without bells. The wind carried the scent of firewood, old wood, and that quiet dampness that only exists in houses where time has settled down to live. Upon arrival, Doña Brigida received her in the foyer, where a pendulum clock marked the seconds as if counting stories, not minutes. "Señorita Alvarado," the woman said without smiling, "there is not much to explain. We are not ones for too much talk here. The girls are waiting for you." They ascended a wide staircase with carved railings and walked down a long corridor where the silence seemed to have its own weight. At the end, a double door opened with a slight creak. Inside, a room illuminated by a large window gave way to a different world. Josefina, 9 years old, sat by the desk, writing with a pen that barely slid across the paper. She did not look up when she heard the footsteps. She was thin, with a fine face and straight eyebrows. Her dress was impeccably ironed, and her hairstyle was tight and precise. There was more than just discipline in her. There was distance. Leonor, however, barely 6 years old, ran barefoot across the carpet with a rag doll in her arms and flowers sprinkled on her face. Seeing Luz Maria, she stopped short and looked at her with the charming surprise of someone who finds a desired novelty. "Are you the new lady?" Leonor asked, taking a timid step. "I am Luz Maria," she replied, bending down a little. "I have come to stay with you for a while." Josefina said nothing. She only set down her pen, stood up with contained grace, and retreated toward a side door. "The older one is still in deep mourning," Doña Brigida explained in a low voice. "But the little one needs someone to teach her more than just letters." In the following days, Luz Maria began to adapt to the house's routine. She shared meals with the girls in a small dining room next to the kitchen. She walked with them through the orchard in the mornings. She read them stories in the afternoons. And at night, when everything was asleep, she stayed in her room, reviewing every gesture of the day as if weaving an invisible blanket. However, something caught her attention. No one mentioned the Count, neither the girls, nor the housekeeper, nor the servants. It was as if his name were forbidden. When Luz Maria asked about him, Doña Brigida only replied with a brief sentence. He does not usually come down much. 3 days passed without seeing him, until one night, while crossing the corridor that led to the library, she thought she felt a presence. She stopped. A light breeze moved the curtains of the closed office, and then she saw him. A tall, firm, masculine silhouette was outlined behind the window's white veil. He did not move. He did not speak. He only watched. Luz Maria felt something stop inside her. It was not fear. It was not surprise. It was something else. The feeling that someone was looking at her, as one looks at a book that has not yet been opened. She did not ask. She did not call out. She simply continued walking in silence with her heartbeats in order and her soul on alert. The house of San Remigio was large, yes, but even larger was everything that remained unsaid within it. The scent of toasted bread drifted through the kitchen walls as the morning began to sketch itself in golden tones over the hacienda. Luz Maria moved with precision. She served the cups of hot milk and distributed the slices of bread and jam like one who deposits trust in small hands. Leonor, with her loose curls and lips stained with strawberry, hummed a child's tune as she swung her legs under the table. Josefina, in contrast, maintained an upright posture and a low gaze, cutting her bread with excessive care. It was as if any distraction might make her lose her balance. The dining room door opened without announcement. Bruno Castañeda y del Valle, Count of San Remigio, crossed the threshold in silence. He wore a dark linen shirt, his collar unbuttoned, and his face paler than the day. His mere presence caused the atmosphere to change. The servants paused for a second. Josefina lifted her eyes, and Leonor stopped humming. Luz Maria looked at him directly without lowering her gaze, with the respect that neither implores nor kneels. He did not seem surprised. His eyes traveled over her with measured slowness, without crossing boundaries, without invading. They simply registered her. He noted the upright figure, the serene expression, the firmness with which she held the teapot. "Señorita Alvarado," he finally said with a grave voice without a smile. "Count," she replied in an equal tone. Silence. Leonor was the first to regain her ease. "Papa, do you want bread with jam?" She made it. Bruno nodded with a slight gesture. He took a seat at the head of the table where no one had sat for a long time. His presence was not imposing because of his height, but because of the way he filled the space. It was as if even the air adapted to his contained grief. Luz Maria served him a cup without trembling. Her fingers briefly brushed his as she handed it to him. It was an instant, a mere touch, a thread, a warning. During breakfast, Bruno did not ask questions. He only observed. The girls ate as if they wanted to please him, and he, instead of words, offered long, measured gazes. Seeing Leonor's smile as she rested her head on Luz Maria's arm, something in his expression changed. A memory crossed him without asking permission. Clara de Solozano, his wife. He remembered her laughing in that very dining room, with her hair loose and her dress stained with flour. Leonor was still a dream then, and Josefina was just learning to walk. He recalled the sound of her voice when she made a call without reason, and how the echo of that laugh had faded without return after the illness. Now another woman was there. She did not wear sweet perfumes or expensive dresses. She did not fill the house with words or seek to please. And yet, her mere presence was beginning to move something in the dormant foundations of the place. After breakfast, Bruno withdrew without saying goodbye. No one expected him to. That afternoon, from the balcony of his office, he saw her. Luz Maria was sitting in the garden beneath the walnut tree, a book in her hands, and the girls on either side. She was reading aloud in a clear tone, without artificial intonations. Leonor listened with her head resting in her lap. Josefina, without looking directly, feigned disinterest while her eyes did not miss a single word. Bruno made no sound. He did not interrupt. He stayed in the shadow with his hands clasped behind his back and his lips without expression. But inside, A slight, very slight crack was beginning to open. He had not thought anyone could bring comfort to this house again. Yet there she was, sitting beneath a tree, reading as if words could weave a home. The morning unfolded warmly over the light stone walls, and a gentle breeze swept through the courtyards like a scarcely noticed caress. Luz Maria was accompanying Leonor in the usual reading routine, but that day, the girl could not keep her attention on the pages. Her restless eyes drifted toward the classroom's open window, where the air brought the wild scent of something more alive than books. "What is behind the chapel?" the little one asked, stopping in the middle of a sentence. Luz Maria thought for a moment. Since her arrival, she had only traversed the main halls and the north wing where her quarters were. That corner was outside the usual route. "We can find out," she said, gently closing the book. They left without haste, crossing the cobbled courtyard, where the servants moved in silence. They skirted the old chapel, whose walls were covered with moss and shadow, until they found a low gate, half covered by dry branches. Leonor pushed with childish strength. The rusted hinge protested as it turned, and on the other side, a forgotten world opened. It was a hidden garden without defined paths, where the weeds grew freely, and the shrubs seemed to have forgotten their shape. A corroded iron bench leaned beneath a wild lemon tree, and an untrimmed vine was tangled in a broken railing. But amidst so much abandonment, small glimpses of life still peeped out green shoots, a trembling flower, the promise of something that was once beautiful. "Mama played here," Leonor whispered, as if unsure she should say it aloud. Luz Maria did not reply. She knelt on the damp earth and began to clear the dry leaves with her hands. The girl imitated her without being asked. For hours they worked like this, without much talk. They let the silence speak for them. The territory stained their nails. The wind tangled their hair, but neither complained. Bruno watched them from a side gallery on the second floor. Leaning against a column, his hand resting on the wrought iron railing, he viewed the scene as if contemplating a memory not entirely his own. The sight of Leonor, crouched beside that woman with the tranquil face and steady hands, brought back an antique scent all at once. Lavender, rosemary, and the soft laughter of his dead wife, running between those very bushes. He closed his eyes. The garden had been his too, his refuge. He abandoned it the day grief stole his desire to water anything. Now, something was beginning to blossom there again. He did not know what it was, but he could feel it. That afternoon, Josefina approached the garden's entrance gate. She did not cross it, she did not greet them. She just stood there, hands clasped, lips pressed, watching Leonor and Luz Maria laugh as they uncovered a rosebush hidden beneath the weeds. "Do you want to help us?" the governess asked, her voice warm. Josefina did not answer. She turned and left without a sound. That night, when Luz Maria returned to her room, she found a book bound in dark fabric on the table. It was poetry. Her heart gave a start. She had not seen the book before. Opening the first page, she found a handwritten note, unsigned. "For the one who knows how to see beauty where others see only dirt." She stared at the sentence as if she could touch it. It was as if someone from the most absolute silence had told her everything no one dared to name. In Santa Clara del Llano, words are not always spoken aloud. They sometimes travel wrapped in gestures, between porcelain cups and fans that snap shut with a subtle click. And when a new woman steps onto old territory, the silence is quick to find its echo. The rumors began in the doorways after Mass. They started in the cool corridors of the large houses. They arose during breakfast served with thick cream and cinnamon tea. They spoke of Luz Maria Alvarado. First it was her walk, then her way of looking, then her story. "They say Don Prudencio brought her," murmured a woman with a tilted hat spreading honey on a biscuit, "but he returned her like damaged merchandise." "And why exactly?" asked another with false innocence. "For reasons not spoken aloud, but which we all understand," a third intervened, lowering her tone. The architect of these comments was Doña Tadea Montiel, the wife of the magistrate Aristides Villegas, an ambitious man, envious of the respect Bruno Castañeda y del Valle still commanded in the valley. Tadea had a tongue sharp as a needle and a perfect memory for the faults of others. She had never set foot on the San Remigio estate, but she spoke of it as if she had been born within its walls. "They sent for her to look after children," she released one afternoon with a twisted smile, "but she is looking after something else." The rumor then spread that Luz Maria had not only been rejected for her figure, but for something much darker, something improper for a decent woman. They did not say what it was. There was no need. In that circle, the implied weighed more than the said. A week later, Bruno was invited to a social luncheon at the Villegas home. The pretext was a discussion about renovating the bridge across the river. He went not by choice, but by obligation. The lunch was served on a patio with wisteria in bloom. The conversation revolved around politics, harvests, and the climate. Until Tadea, a smile on her lips, the dagger ready, launched her question. "Count, how is your new governess?" she asked. "We have heard she has an interesting past." Bruno raised his eyes from his glass without haste. He did not frown, he did not raise his voice. He merely looked at her with the implacable serenity of one who knows how to measure the weight of another's venom. "She does her work with discretion and efficiency," he replied with neutrality. "Ah, but you know that in these small towns the past does not always stay where one wants it to," she continued, like someone dropping a spot of ink into clear water. Bruno did not respond. He took a sip of wine and turned his face toward the garden, as if the conversation no longer merited his attention. He neither denied, nor confirmed, nor defended her. On the estate, meanwhile, Luz Maria was distributing freshly baked rolls among the laborers, as she did some afternoons. She knew the flour stretched further when shared. She offered them with a brief smile, without extra words. One of them, a 15-year-old boy with fingers stained with tar, told her, "Thank you, señorita. No one has done this since the mistress died." She bowed her head. She did not know if she should feel honored or alluded to, but she accepted the gesture with humility. That night, returning to her room, she noticed the window was ajar. The air came in cold, and the silence seemed different, denser. Bruno saw her from the corridor of the west wing. The lanterns projected long shadows onto the stone floor. She was standing next to the table, organizing books with the same serenity she had carried in her eyes since the first day. He said nothing, did nothing. He only watched her for a few seconds longer than necessary, and for the first time, something in his gaze shifted. He no longer saw her as a woman living under his roof. He was beginning to see her as a question he did not dare to answer. The rain arrived without announcement, like everything that changes routine without asking permission. It began with a humid breeze at dusk, and by the time night enveloped the estate, the sky had overflowed onto the rooftops, as if secretly washing away the dust of the days. Josefina, who had shown a slight flush on her cheeks and a duller look than usual since early in the day, did not go down to the dining room that night. She said she preferred to stay in her room. When Leonore went to look for her to show her a dried flower she had rescued from the garden, she found her trembling beneath the blankets, with chapped lips and a face flushed with fever. Luz Maria went up immediately. The girl did not protest. She merely opened her eyes with effort and tried to focus her voice. "I am cold," she whispered. The governess stroked her forehead with the palm of her hand. She was burning. The heat radiating from her was not the heat of an afternoon in the fields. It was that unsettling heat the body brings only when defending itself from the world from within. "Do not worry, Josefina," she murmured. "I am going to take care of you." She sent for warm water. She prepared damp cloths and opened the windows so the breeze might ease the stuffy air. She stayed by her side, watching her breathe while the rain beat on the glass with a sad rhythm. Leonore, uneasy, appeared in the doorway with a blanket in her arms. She said nothing. She only looked at her sister and then at Luz Maria, as if unsure whether to approach or run away. "May I stay?" she asked in a low voice. "Of course," she replied. "Just stay close and quiet." The girl placed the blanket on the chair and sat on the floor, hugging her knees as if her mere presence could help hold the world together. The hours passed slowly. Josefina was delirious at times, muttering loose phrases, unconnected words. Then she would sink into a restless sleep from which she woke with a start. Luz Maria did not move. She changed the cloths gently. She moistened the girl's lips with fresh water. She held her hand when the fever rose. Around midnight, when the rest of the house slept, Josefina half opened her eyes. The dim light of the oil lamp outlined Luz Maria's face with a golden halo. The girl looked at her for a long time without blinking, as if seeing someone beyond her. "Mama," she whispered. Luz Maria held her breath. It was not a game or mere delirium. It was a word spoken with need, with memory, with a longing that had not found its voice until that moment. She did not correct. She did not explain. She only sang something very old, a mere murmur, a lullaby her own mother had repeated in her childhood when the thunder made her tremble. Josefina closed her eyes at the sound. Her hand, still warm, clung more tightly to Luz Maria's. From the north wing corridor, where the shadow covered the walls like a thick cloak, Bruno watched. He had not announced himself. He had made no sound. The rain and the fever had stolen control of his schedule. He went up, driven by a hunch, by that instinct that only appears when something inside is stirring. And then he saw her. Luz Maria sitting by the bed, her head bowed, her lips moving barely in a melody that seemed from another time. The scene was simple, almost intimate, but it contained a tenderness that hurt. He did not want to interrupt. He remained standing there, leaning against the frame, without the slightest gesture. The lullaby brought him a clear image. His wife, with Josefina in her arms, singing to her under the same rain many years before. He remembered the blue cotton dress, her hair still damp from the bath, and the laughter that made the walls tremble with joy. Now, another woman was singing, and his daughter was listening. Bruno turned and left without a word. The next morning, the sky dawned clear. The song of the birds broke the silence with a cleaner tone. Josefina was sleeping better. The fever was dropping. Luz Maria had not yet rested, but her eyes, though tired, showed no defeat. They showed purpose. Opening her room door to fetch more water, she saw something on the threshold. It was a bouquet of orange blossoms tied with a jute thread. It carried no note. It did not need one. Luz Maria looked at it for a long time, as if it were a subtle offering of something not named but felt. She did not pick it up immediately. She only contemplated it in silence, knowing that this simple, silent gesture spoke more than any apology and more than any promise. The morning unfolded slowly over the San Remigio estate. The sky was clear, but the air carried a strange density, as if the day sensed something would disrupt the usual tranquility of the countryside. In the kitchen, the servants' murmur grew hurried. The laborers checked their shirts and combed their hair with wet fingers. Even Doña Brigida, with her stone face, seemed more vigilant than usual. Luz Maria noticed it early. There was a tension floating in the air. It was a kind of invisible hum that made everyone lower their voices and walk faster. She soon found out. Don Prudencio Aguayo, the same man who had rejected her with a dry phrase and without a drop of compassion, was coming to meet with Don Bruno Castañeda y del Valle about matters related to the territory adjoining both properties. The news hit her like a weight in her stomach. It was not because she feared a confrontation, but because she did not know how to face the gaze of the man who had made her feel disposable. She took a deep breath. She had no reason to hide. She walked to the garden. She took a book without opening it and sat down next to Leonor to go over the letters. She pretended nothing troubled her, but inside, the memory of that afternoon at the station stirred like an echo that had not completely faded. Around 11 o'clock, Don Prudencio's carriage appeared on the gravel road. He came alone, escorted by his coachman, his frock coat fitted, his beard perfectly trimmed, and that dry expression that no longer needed words to impose itself. Getting out, he did not greet the workers or the stable boys who came out to meet him. He just walked toward the central patio, as if the territory belonged to him. Luz Maria saw him from a distance. She was walking with her embroidery basket in her hands, planning to cross through one of the side corridors when she heard his voice. "Just look," Don Prudencio said, stopping in front of a pair of laborers. "If you leave the doors open, even what you have returned ends up coming back." The phrase stabbed like a thorn. He did not raise his voice, but he said it loud enough for everyone around to hear. Some turned away uncomfortably. Others lowered their gaze. She remained motionless from the corridor. She did not look at him. She did not answer him, but her face lost color, as if an invisible crack had opened in her chest. Bruno appeared an instant later. He had heard the phrase. He did not need explanations. "Señor Aguayo," he said with a firm voice, "before discussing boundary matters, I want to remind you of something essential. In this house, a lady is not insulted, especially not in front of my workers." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses seemed to stop snorting. Don Prudencio looked at him with that mixture of contempt and bewilderment only held by men who believe themselves above all correctness. "I did not intend to offend," he said with a wave of his hand. "It was just a passing comment." "Then be careful what you let pass through your mouth," Bruno retorted with a sharp courtesy. "The air is clean here, and dirty words are noticed too much." Don Prudencio blinked once, as if measuring the reply, but did not offer it. He simply adjusted the lapel of his jacket and continued walking toward the office, with Bruno a step behind. Luz Maria did not move. It was not fear she felt. It was something else. It was the weariness of always having to justify her existence, of having to prove with actions what others ruined with rumors. She entered the house with a calm step, but inside, she had already begun to pack. That night, when the girls fell asleep and the hallways were in shadow, she opened her trunk for the first time since arriving at the estate. She took out her mother's quilt, folded with care. She placed her few dresses on top, her embroidery threads, her books. She did it in silence, with slow movements, as if packing also hurt her bones. On top of everything, she placed the note she still kept between the pages of the poetry book. Not out of spite, but out of respect. She took no resentment with her, but neither did she take empty promises. Around midnight, she closed the trunk and dragged it to the door. She did not want to wake anyone. She would leave at dawn, just as she had arrived in Santa Clara del Llano, without applause, without witnesses, without noise. But when she opened the room door, she found Bruno standing in the hallway. He was leaning against the frame, his arms crossed, his expression shadowed. "Were you planning to leave without telling anyone?" he asked without raising his voice. She looked at him without surprise. She no longer had the energy to pretend. "I do not want to cause more problems. There are already enough people murmuring about me." Bruno observed her in silence. The nearest lantern cast long shadows on the stone floor. There was no anger in his eyes. There was a weariness similar to her own. "I do not care what they murmur," he finally said. "I care about what happens inside this house." "I do not belong here," Luz Maria replied. "You know it. This house has history, a name, a family name. I am just a woman who arrived when no one was expecting her. And yet, if you leave," Bruno said, taking a step forward, "there will be no one left to look after my home." Luz Maria pressed her lips together, not out of pride, but not to cry. She clutched the edge of the quilt between her fingers as if she could cling to something that would not break. "I do not look after estates, Count. I only know how to look after people." "Then, is that what is missing here?" he countered. "People, not furniture, not silences. People who stay even when there is wind, even when there is noise." Silence settled between them like a thick veil. He did not move closer. She did not lower her gaze. And in that instant the contained tension was deeper than any friction, more intimate than any promise. Bruno looked down at the trunk. "Tomorrow morning, I will bring the carpenter. That lock can no longer hold." Luz Maria looked at him for a long time. Then, without saying a word, she untied the knot that closed the quilt and reopened the trunk. It was not a surrender. It was a choice. Behind the door, the walls of the San Remigio estate seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if finally someone was looking after what had long been thought irremediable. The morning slid slowly over the windows of the San Remigio estate. It filtered the light with a soft, almost nostalgic tone. The orchard trees seemed to whisper among themselves. A warm air, one of those that announce the cold is starting to retreat, caressed the open curtains of the classroom where Luz Maria was reading in a low voice. Leonor, sitting next to her, was drawing with charcoal on a piece of paper. It was not a perfect drawing, but in its crooked lines and gray smudges, there was an effort the girl did not usually show. Josefina, further away, was leafing through an atlas without saying a word, although now and then she would lift her eyes and fix them on her sister and the governess. When the pendulum clock struck 11, Leonor put down the pencil. She got up without a word and left the room. She returned minutes later with a small wooden box in her hands. Its lid was carved with floral motifs, and a gold clasp was oxidized by time. "I want to give you something," she said in a timid voice. Luz Maria looked up in surprise. "To me?" Leonor nodded. She sat beside her and placed the box on her lap. "It was Mama's, but I never use it. I found it in the sewing box with her things. I think you should have it." Luz Maria hesitated an instant before opening it. Inside, on a velvet lining that still held the faint scent of lavender, rested a jade necklace. It was simple, elegant, with green links set in pale gold. It was beautiful, without ostentation, like everything that had belonged to someone who loved naturally. "Leonor, I do not know what to say. Just accept it. Mama used to say that whoever keeps beauty only for themselves withers it. And you do not wither anything." She hugged her without thinking, a brief, tender, spontaneous moment. Josefina from her corner said nothing, but she did not look away. That noon, Luz Maria wore it. Not out of vanity, nor only out of gratitude. She wore it with the same care a woman allows herself to be touched by a memory. The jade rested naturally on her collarbone, as if it had belonged to her all along. She was not looking for anyone to see it. And yet, someone did. Bruno appeared unexpectedly in the east wing corridor just as she was leaving with the girls for the garden. He was dressed in dark clothing as always. He held the accounting papers in one hand. Looking up, he stopped short. His eyes dropped from Luz Maria's face to the center of her chest. There was the jade, fixed, unmistakable. Bruno's demeanor changed. It was not subtle. It was immediate. He walked toward her with measured steps. He did not shout, but when he spoke, his voice was harsh. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. Luz Maria blinked, confused. "Leonor gave it to me. She said it was her mother's." "It is a family object," he interrupted. "It should not be in the hands of an employee." The words hurt her more because of his tone than their content. It was not what he said. It was how he said it. It was as if she had suddenly crossed an invisible line she did not know existed. "If it bothers you so much," she replied gently, "you can keep it." She undid the clasp with delicacy, without drama. She extended her hand. The jade hung from her fingers like an unwanted offering. Bruno did not take it. He only looked at her. For an instant he seemed about to say something, but he stopped himself. Luz Maria left it on the nearest table. She took Leonor's hand and continued walking without looking back. That night, the house slept with a shrunken soul. Not even Josefina asked anything. Doña Brigida stayed in the kitchen longer than usual. And Bruno did not dine. In his office, surrounded by shelves full of books and documents, he held the necklace in the palm of his hand. It was as if by touching it, he could understand what he had done wrong. The last time he had seen it was a rainy night 4 years earlier. Clara was wearing it when she laughed for the last time, her soft, almost trembling laughter, as she waited for him beside the piano. He had given it to her. It was placed there because he said jade brought peace. After his death, Bruno kept the necklace in a box. He did not know Leonor had found it months later. She had hidden it among the things she wanted to remember. It was not the necklace. It was not Luz Maria. It was what the object brought out, unresolved pain, the absence that still consumed everything. Instead of naming the feeling, he had thrown the necklace back in anger, as if that could bring justice to the silences he had kept for years. The next morning he knocked on Luz Maria's door before dawn. She was still dressing. She didn't know. When she opened it, she found him standing there, his hands clasped, his face more human than ever. "I have come to apologize," he said directly. She did not answer. She waited. "That necklace belonged to my wife. She wore it the night she died. I did not know Leonore had kept it, or that she had given it to you. I reacted badly yesterday. Very badly." Luz Maria lowered her gaze for an instant. Then she looked at him again, calmly. "I did not wear it to provoke you. I wore it because it was given to me with affection. I know." The silence settled again. This time, however, it did not hurt. It simply floated. "There is something I want to show you," Bruno added, gesturing toward the hall. "If you have the time." She nodded. She followed him down the long corridor that joined the north gallery with the oldest part of the house. There, behind a heavy door, was a room she had never entered before. Bruno opened it and lit a lamp. The light illuminated a wide space lined with shelves with thick rugs and a reading table at the center. It was a library, but not one exhibited to show off culture. It was intimate, used, filled with loose papers, notebooks, books opened halfway, worn pencils. "This is the only place where I have not removed Clara's things," he said in a low voice. "She used to write here. She read and left me notes hidden between the pages. Here are the other silences I do not know how to speak." Luz Maria looked at the spines of the books, the folded corners, the edges stained with ink. There was life in that room, and grief too. Above all, however, there was memory. "I didn't know you kept so much in such a small space," she whispered. "Neither did I, until you arrived. I realized I kept listening to only one voice, when there are others that also deserve to be heard." She said nothing. She walked to a low shelf, touched the spine of a cloth-bound notebook, and opened it at random. Inside, in fine handwriting, someone had written a sentence. "True love does not erase what came before. It sustains it without fear of breaking." Bruno watched her, not with desire, but with gratitude. It was that tenderness which cannot be spoken, but which trembles in the hands. Luz Maria closed the notebook and placed it back. "Thank you for bringing me here. Thank you for not having left." In that hidden corner of the domain among books, dim light, and postponed truths, something began to heal. Neither of them knew what to name it. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving a silence that clung to the walls like the aroma of damp earth. The San Remigio estate was waking slowly, wrapped in mist. The birds were barely trying their first songs, and the leaves were dripping nostalgia. Inside the house, activities began as on any other day. Bruno, however, did not come to breakfast. His footsteps were not heard in the main corridor. He was in the library. This was the same room he had shown Luz Maria days before, that sanctuary of wood, paper, and memory. Things he had not dared to touch still remained there. He had woken with a strange desire to put things in order. He wanted to open drawers he had not opened for years. He needed to confront the accumulated dust in the corners where Clara still lived, suspended in objects no one else had touched since her departure. He knelt before an old chest of drawers and slowly began to review the contents of its compartments. He found a small box of buttons, braided threads, dried petals saved between pages, and farther back, between two linen-bound notebooks, a meticulously folded sheet of paper. He recognized it before he unfolded it. Clara had a way of folding paper that left no doubt. It was a clean, symmetrical fold, with perfect corners. Her handwriting was small, slanted, and sweet, without artifice. With trembling hands, Bruno opened the letter. It was undated. It had no signature. It did not need one. It was her handwriting, her tone, her words. "My dearest Bruno, if you ever find this letter, it is because I did not have time to give you these words aloud. I am not clinging to life. I am clinging to you, to us, to our girls. I know that pain can be as strong as love, sometimes stronger. But I do not want you to mourn me for so long that you forget to live. Do not turn this house into a tomb. Do not deny our daughters a smile, a caress that does not come from me. No one will take my place because love is not replaced. But it can be enlarged. And you deserve to love again, even if it seems impossible at first. If someone ever manages to touch your soul as you touched mine, do not push them away. Do not overthink it. Do not be afraid. I will be fine wherever I have to wait, with all that I was, and all that I loved you. The paper rustled between his fingers. He did not cry. He did not break down. But inside, something broke gently, like a dry branch that yields in silence. He read the letter once more, then again and again, as if he needed to memorize every word, to allow them to cross through him, to release him. Outside, the day went on. Inside, Bruno felt stripped of a weight he had carried for so long that he no longer remembered how it felt to walk without it. He left the letter on the table, took a deep breath, and walked out of the library. His steps led him to the garden without his planning it. He did not hesitate. He did not stop to think. He simply walked, guided by a certainty. He needed to see her. The dahlia garden had been reborn under the care of Luz Maria and the girls. The flower beds that had once looked dry now glowed with soft colors. The perfume of the flowers mixed with the mountain breeze. The sun, filtered through the branches, drew shadows on the cobblestones, as if weaving lace of light. Luz Maria was there, sitting on an iron bench. Her hands rested on her lap. Her gaze was fixed on something unseen. She was not reading. She was not sewing. She was doing nothing, just breathing. Her mere presence filled the air with a calmness Bruno had not felt in years. He did not make a sound. He did not want to announce himself. He walked toward her, his heart beating slowly, but firmly. She sensed him. She looked up with serenity. Her eyes were not startled at seeing him. They simply met his, as if she had been expecting him. "May I sit down?" he asked. "Of course," she replied without moving. "This bench is not mine, but it supports me." Bruno smiled faintly. He sat down beside her, not too close, but not so far as to seem distant. There was a brief silence. Then he spoke. "I found a letter this morning. Clara wrote it before she died. She never gave it to me. I suppose she did not have the time." Luz Maria lowered her gaze slightly without interrupting him. "She asked me not to live in grief. She asked me not to turn this house into an altar of what was. She told me not to deny my daughters a motherly presence, nor myself the possibility of feeling something again." Bruno took a breath. "She told me that if someone managed to touch my soul, I should not push them away, that I should not be afraid." She looked at him then, not with surprise, but with calm tenderness. It was as if she understood that those words were gestures of surrender more than revelations. "And are you afraid?" she asked gently. "Yes," he replied without hesitation, "because I do not know how to begin again, because I do not know if I can offer anyone more than ruins and shadows. Sometimes ruins hold flowers, and shadows also provide shelter," she said. Bruno turned toward her with a mixture of gratitude and fragility he rarely let show. "I am not asking you to love me," he said in a low voice, "only to allow me to stay close to your soul, to hear you breathe, to know that you are here. That would already be more than I deserve." Luz Maria did not respond immediately. She looked at him for a long time, like someone measuring words before handing them over. "You are not made of shadows, Bruno. You are made of silence. And silences, if listened to carefully, also say beautiful things." He closed his eyes for an instant, not because he wanted to avoid her, but because for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. The sun continued its course. The dahlias swayed in the rhythm of the wind, and in that corner of the world, between an iron bench, a broken man, and a rebuilt woman, something invisible and powerful began to take shape. It was not a declaration. It was not a kiss. It was something else, something deeper, more tender. It was a silent promise of companionship, an open space for healing, and a new heartbeat that did not yet have a name, but already knew how to feel. The day began like all the others at the San Remigio estate. There was the distant crowing of roosters, the smell of toasted coffee creeping through the corridors, and shadows still sleeping on the stone walls. But there was something different in the air. It was a subtle change that only attentive hearts knew how to notice. It was not an event. It was not a marked date. It was something more intimate in intention. Bruno had been thinking about it for days, ever since he had read Clara's letter. He had been thinking since Luz Maria had received his words in the garden without fleeing, without demanding anything. She had simply held him with the silent strength of someone who does not need promises to stay. That morning, instead of going straight to the library or walking the boundaries with the foreman, he went to the kitchen. Doña Brigida looked at him as if seeing a ghost. "Can I get you something, Señor Count?" "I want you to prepare a special dinner," he said directly. "Just for the four of us." The woman stared at him. "The four of us?" "Yes, the girls, Luz Maria, and me." Brigida asked no more questions. She just nodded with a slight inclination of her head. But when she turned around, her lips held a smile no one could see. That afternoon, Bruno went to the garden. Luz Maria was teaching Leonor how to transplant dahlias. Josefina was watching them from the porch, a book open in her hand. She had held it for half an hour without turning a page. The scene was so natural, so peaceful, that for a moment Bruno doubted. Did he have the right to break that balance? What if what he desired was not what she was willing to receive? But fear, he thought, had never been a valid excuse to silence what is true. "Miss Alvarado," he called softly. Luz Maria looked up. Her hands were covered in earth. Her hair had come a little loose from the bun, as it did every time she bent down in the garden. But her face had that glow that only earned peace brings. "Yes?" "I would like to invite you and the girls to dinner tonight, here in the main dining room." She did not hide her surprise, not at the invitation, but at what it meant. It was the first time since she had crossed that threshold that she would be treated as something more than an employee. She would be treated as part of something familiar, intimate, human. "Of course, if you wish it." Bruno smiled with that half-smile he was still learning to use. "I do wish it." That night, the dining room was prepared as in old times. The embroidered white tablecloth that had been kept in the sideboard for months was spread with delicacy. The bronze candelabras were polished. The porcelain dishes, inherited from Bruno's mother, returned to their place on the long table. The girls arrived first. Josefina wore a lavender dress that Brigida had carefully chosen. Leonor wore a white ribbon in her hair, and her hands were still stained with ink. Luz Maria arrived last in a simple dress of fine fabric. Her hair was more carefully tied up than usual. She wore no jewelry or oils, only that presence of hers that needed no adornments. Bruno waited for them standing up. When they sat down, they did so without the tension of other times. It was not an imposed meeting. It was a scene that, though new, felt as if it had always been destined to happen. The dinner went by with soft conversation comments about the new flowers in the garden, about a book of fables Leonor had started, and about Josefina's progress in Latin. Bruno was not a man of easy laughs. That night, however, he allowed himself a small, sincere one, like a luminous crack in a wall that had been closed for years. After dessert, when the girls were sent to bed, Bruno remained alone with Luz Maria at the table. The silence was not awkward. It was dense, but not heavy. It was as if both knew that the important words were approaching, one by one. "I want to tell you something," he began in a low voice. She looked at him serenely. "I am listening. It is not easy for me to talk about what I feel. You know that." But if I have learned anything in these months, it is that silence can also hurt if it is not filled with truth. Luz Maria waited. Her chest was beginning to beat faster, but her face remained still, like water before the first ripple. You have brought back to this house something I thought was lost. You have healed my daughters with patience. You have confronted me without humiliating me. You have looked at me without judging me. And not only that, you have made this place, which was a tomb for years, feel like a home again. Luz Maria felt the air thicken, not from fear, but from contained emotion. That is why I want to ask you something. Not as an act of duty, not out of obligation. I ask because I choose it. And if you do not want it, there is no offense, no pain. Bruno stood up. He did not kneel. He was not looking for drama. He simply moved his chair closer to hers and took her hand with respect. Will you marry me? Luz Maria did not respond. Her gaze was lost in the texture of the tablecloth, then in the glass of the cup, then in his face. And there it stopped. I did not expect this, she said, barely a whisper. Neither did I, he replied. But here I am. I do not ask you to love me today. I only ask you to allow me to try tomorrow. She looked away, not with rejection, but with vertigo. She was like someone looking at a beautiful landscape, but at the edge of a cliff. I need to think. Take all the time you need. Bruno did not insist. He did not pressure her. He squeezed her hand gently and left in silence. That night, Luz Maria returned to her room. She lit the lamp, undid her bun, and sat on the bed. She unfolded her mother's quilt, the same one that had accompanied her from Veracruz, and spread it over the sheets. She lay down with her arms gathered in, as if seeking the refuge of a distant womb. And then, without meaning to, she wept. She cried without lament. She cried without sound. They were the silent tears of someone who has desired something with her soul, and having it in front of her, is afraid to take it, just in case she does not deserve it. The quilt absorbed her weeping as the earth receives rain without complaining, without returning it, as if it had been waiting for it forever. And there she finally fell asleep, her soul trembling. Because sometimes the hardest thing is not to accept love. The hardest thing is to accept that one can also be chosen. The afternoon began to cover itself with clouds when no one expected it. The sky, which had been clear and serene in the morning, suddenly turned gray. It was as if the earth itself had sensed that something denser, something darker than rain, was about to arrive. At the San Remigio estate, activity continued. The girls were reviewing lessons in the classroom with Luz Maria. The workers were finishing their tasks in the stable. The evening bread was being prepared in the kitchen. Only Bruno seemed restless. He paced back and forth in his study, as if an invisible warning was silently pursuing him. It was then that Doña Brigida, her face paler than usual, approached with slow steps, an envelope in her hands. She handed it to him without a word. Her gaze, however, said more than she dared to pronounce. Bruno broke the seal carefully. The paper was of good quality, lightly scented with finely decorated edges. The contents, on the other hand, were poisoned. Senor Count, I write to you not out of resentment, but out of moral duty. It is common knowledge that Miss Luz Maria Alvarado has managed to weave a web of sympathies, especially with your daughters, to gain your favor. It is no coincidence that after being rejected by another landowner, you will know which one. She has now found refuge in your house and in your attention. What seems like tenderness to you, others see as manipulation. A woman who arrives without a name, without a dowry, and with half-stories, rarely does so without a purpose. It is up to you to decide what to do with this warning. Sincerely, a friend of the truth. Bruno read the letter in silence once, then again. He did not frown. He did not raise his voice. But his heart pounded hard, not from doubt, but from rage. It was not the content that hurt him. It was the cowardice. It was the poison hidden behind false courtesy, and even more so, The certainty that malicious words traveled faster than horses in that town. It was then that Josefina, who had entered the study looking for a notebook, stopped when she saw the envelope on the table. She picked it up, looked at it, and her eyes widened in surprise. "That handwriting," she murmured. "It belongs to Senora Tadea. I have seen her write letters with Mama. She always makes that loop in the G and that ink smudge in the commas. It is hers, I am sure." Bruno did not ask how she knew. It was enough for him to see her conviction. In that moment, he made a decision. Send for everyone, the workers, Doña Tadea, the aldermen, the neighbors. Tonight, here. For what? To finish this once and for all? The storm broke just as night fell. The rain beat furiously against the window panes. Lightning momentarily illuminated the corridors of the estate. Even so, the summoned people began to arrive one by one, sheltering themselves under umbrellas, capes, and wet hats. Never before had the main hall gathered so many familiar and unfamiliar faces. Never before had such thick tension been felt in the atmosphere. Luz Maria did not know what was happening. She had only heard rumors in the kitchen, nervous comments, and a warning from Doña Brigida that she would not forget. No matter what happens tonight, keep your head high. When she entered the hall, Bruno was already standing by the fireplace. He was not dressed as usual. He wore a black suit, simple, but without a tie. His gaze was firm. His posture was irrefutable. Everyone fell silent when they saw him raise his hand. "This morning," he began, "I received an anonymous letter that accuses Miss Luz Maria Alvarado of acting out of self-interest. It accuses her of manipulating my daughters, of faking a morality she does not possess." The murmuring was inevitable. Some lowered their gaze, others looked at each other. "The letter does not have a signature," he continued, "but the person who wrote it forgot one detail. My daughter Josefina recognized the handwriting." Everyone turned to the girl, who stood beside her father, her face pale but determined. "It is the handwriting of Senora Tadea Montiel," she said. "I saw her write it myself." Doña Tadea stood up immediately, red with fury and shame. "It is slander. A child cannot—" "Silence," Bruno interrupted, not raising his voice but with an authority that cut the air like a knife. "You have said enough in this house without having the right to do so." He looked at the rest. "Luz Maria does not have a noble surname, nor fortune, nor an embellished story. But she has what is often missing in this town: integrity. She has cared for my daughters with devotion. She has dignified this house with her presence. And if anyone believes they can come here and stain her name without consequences, they are mistaken." He walked toward her. His steps were sure. Luz Maria looked at him with disbelief. No one had ever said so much for her. No one had ever. He had defended in front of so many. Here, before everyone, I declare I respect her. I value her. Anyone suggesting otherwise insults this house, my family, and me. Luz Maria wanted to speak, but she could not. Her legs gave way. Everything went white. Bruno caught her before she touched the floor. A stifled cry swept through the room. The girls ran to her. Josefina took her hand. Leonor wept in silence. Bruno lifted her into his arms. Without offering any explanation, he left the room amid whispers and silence. He laid her in her room. Her mother's quilt covered her to the chest. He moistened her lips. He spoke to her with sweet, clumsy, honest words. "I am here. Everything is fine. I am here." She woke a little later. She was pale, confused. But seeing his face, she knew she had not been dreaming. What happened? A storm, and a truth I could no longer silence. She closed her eyes not to sleep. She wanted to hold that moment. A storm had passed. For the first time in a long time, she was not left alone in the rain. The San Remigio estate had not held a celebration for many years. The main parlor curtains had been closed for too long. The chandeliers were dusty. The windows, accustomed to silence, barely remembered reflecting sound. That autumn, The harvest was generous. The rains did not destroy the fields. Bruno announced that the tradition would resume. The harvest dance would be celebrated. It would not be a mere gathering. It would be a night of light for all who had walked through shadows. The news spread quickly across Santa Clara del Llano. Some did not believe it. Others awaited it with an enthusiasm they had not felt for years. Dresses were sewn. Suits saved from youth were dusted off. Oil lanterns were hung in the streets. At the estate, preparations began weeks in advance. The courtyard was swept with care. The walls were whitewashed. The windows were open to let in life. Luz Maria helped with every detail, but with discretion. She did not ask if she should attend. She asked for no place or invitation. She focused on helping the girls. She looked after the tablecloths. She arranged the flowers the town women sent to adorn the room as an offering. Then 3 days before the event, Bruno appeared on the gallery. She was hanging the napkins in the sun. "Do you have your dress yet?" he asked without preamble. She turned calmly. "I did not think." "You will stand by my side," he interrupted. "That is the only certainty I have." Luz Maria nodded, but her eyes held a tremor. She knew that simply being present was not enough. That night would be a public declaration. It would be a confrontation of glances. It would be a dance between love and social resistance. She did not fear judgment. Still, she knew its weight. The afternoon of the dance arrived with a clean, almost festive sky. The fields smelled of fresh earth, of dry corn, of promise. The girls were the first to dress. Josefina wore a navy blue gown that made her look older. Leonor wore an ivory tone with a wreath of dried flowers in her hair. Luz Maria, in her room, spread the dress she had secretly made onto the bed. It was of raw linen. It had delicate hand-stitched embroidery on the cuffs and neckline. She wore no jewels. She only put on the jade necklace. Leonor had returned it days before with a kiss on the cheek. As she descended the stairs, the murmur turned to silence. Bruno waited for her at the bottom step. He wore a dark gray frock coat. His brocade vest was discreet. But what drew attention was not his clothing. It was his face. He was serene. He was proud. He was almost luminous. "Ready?" he asked. "To walk by your side." "Yes," she replied without lowering her gaze. They entered the room together. The lights were on. The ceiling shone as in the old days. Tables surrounded the central floor, which was covered with wax and eucalyptus branches. The guests turned. Some stopped talking. Others pretended not to look. Bruno stopped in the center of the floor, holding Luz Maria's hand. "I want to thank everyone for coming," he said in a clear voice. "This night celebrates the fruit of our earth. It celebrates the work of our hands. It celebrates the hope that is still cultivated in our hearts." A pause fell. The silence was absolute. "And I want to do this with the woman who has returned my soul." He turned towards her. "Luz Maria Alvarado is not a guest. She is my betrothed." A murmur crossed the room like a chilling wind. Some glasses trembled. Other hands tightened on their fans. No one dared to speak. Doña Tadea, in the background, wore a black lace dress. Her brooch no longer shone as brightly. She raised her fan to her face as if stifling a scream. The wives lowered their eyes. Some did so out of shame. Others did so in resignation. The girls broke the spell. "Dance with us," Leonor asked, pulling Luz Maria. "One turn," Josefina added. She did not smile, but her eyes shone. She leaned down. She took both hands. She spun them in a small circle. Leonor's hair ribbon flew in the air. Josefina laughed for the first time that night. Then Bruno took her hand. "May I have this dance?" She nodded. No words were needed. He led her to the center. The performer raised their violin bow. The first chord filled the room like a caress of time standing still. Bruno placed his hand on her waist. She rested hers on his shoulder. Their eyes met. No words passed between them. Only that invisible certainty is born when two souls recognize each other in the midst of the noise. They began to turn. Luz Maria did not know if her feet touched the floor. The sound enveloped them. The world with its prejudices, rumors, and pasts was left outside. Only they remained. They had the echo of a dance that needed no approval. When the last note fell like a leaf in autumn, no one applauded. Yet no one dared to look with contempt. There was a strength in that scene that could not be denied. Bruno bowed his head. She did too. They left the center hand in hand. They left behind a silence heavy with truth. That night, among lights and the contained whispers, the San Remigio estate once again became what it once was. It was a place where love did not ask permission to blossom. The dawn of the wedding day brought no bells or commotion. There was no parade of carriages. There were no shouts of children running in the roads. There was only a deep blue sky like clean glass. A soft breeze made the already open jacaranda leaves dance. They seemed to know this day had to be different. At the San Remigio estate, the silence was almost ceremonial. The farm hands moved with care. The maids spoke in whispers. Doña Brigida walked the hallways like one guarding a secret about to be revealed. The girls, dressed in white with pale blue ribbons, had woken before dawn. They were excited, yet restrained. They seemed to understand that what was about to happen was not just a ceremony. It was a threshold. Luz Maria remained in her room. She sat before the antique mirror that reflected more soul than figure. She wore an ivory dress. She had stitched it herself over the last few weeks, thread by thread. Each stitch seemed to hold the trembling of her chest. The neckline was simple. It was straight. It had floral embroidery on the edge. The long sleeves fell softly over her wrists. Her hair was tied up with small white flowers. This exposed the profile of a woman who was no longer the one who had gotten off the train months before. On the bed, folded carefully, rested her mother's quilt. Luz Maria stood up. She touched it gently. Then she put it away in the trunk. She did not need it that morning. That quilt had covered her in waiting, in sadness, in doubt. Today, she walked without covers, only with her skin and her name. Brigida's announcement was brief. The chapel is ready. Her legs barely trembled, but her step was firm. She descended the stairs. The staff paused their work for a moment. No one applauded. No one spoke. They only looked. They did so not with judgment, but with something deeper. It was as if they recognized something in her that went beyond the dress. As she stepped out onto the main corridor, the sun already bathed the path connecting the house to the small chapel of Lightstone. The path was bordered by dahlias and open jacarandas. It looked like a seam between the past and the present. Bruno awaited her halfway. He stood with a serene face. He wore a dark frock coat. His hair was neatly combed. A white flower adorned his lapel. He did not move until she was in front of him. Then he looked at her. That was his greeting. Luz Maria raised her eyes. There were no tears. Not yet. But there was a question. Are you sure? Bruno did not smile. He did not need to. I do not seek to replace anyone, he replied. He took her hand gently. I only seek to find an us. She closed her eyes for an instant. When she opened them, the world seemed different. It was not safer, but it was more truthful. She nodded. A tear silently slid down her cheek. Bruno did not wipe it away. He let it fall. That tear was not one of pain. It was one of surrender. They walked the last steps together to the chapel door. Inside, light entered through the small stained glass windows with soft colors. There was no rug. There was only the echo of their steps on the stone floor. The guests were few, but significant. They included the estate workers. They included the town godmothers. They included a few aldermen. Doña Brigida sat in the back. The girls sat in the front pews, holding flowers in their hands. When they entered, everyone stood up. They did so not from protocol, but from respect. Perhaps for the first time, they acted out of admiration. Josefina stared intently at her father. Leonore, with her hands clasped over her bouquet, smiled without speaking a word. The priest, an older man with a grave voice, received them with a blessing free of excessive solemnity. The ceremony was brief, It was simple. There were no elaborate songs or luxuries. There were only words that touched like fine rain, discreet, constant, necessary. Bruno spoke first. I promised to love her without rush, without demands. I promised to respect her in her silences. I promised to share what cannot be said. I promised to honor her name. It is not mine, but today I choose it as my own. Luz Maria trembled, but she did not back away. She took a breath. She spoke with a clear voice. I am not a countess. I have no crest or lineage. But I learned to be a woman of the earth. I learned to be a woman of fire. I learned to be a woman of truth. I promised to care for him without embellishments. I promised to love him without measure. I promised to stay without conditions. A light, emotional murmur ran through the chapel. The priest pronounced the final blessing. The girls were the first to toss white petals into the air. The couple did not kiss. It was not necessary. The look they shared was enough to seal the pact. When they left, the sun was setting sideways. It covered everything with a golden light that seemed to bless without words. Outside, the trees swayed like witnesses. The flowers fell from the jacarandas like soft rain. The staff broke the silence with timid applause. The townswomen wept silently. In the midst of everything, Doña Tadea, from the back of the path, watched expressionlessly. Her fan, always firm, hung lifelessly from her wrist. For the first time, she was speechless. Bruno and Luz Maria walked towards the estate with the girls at their sides. One of the farmhands reached out a hand to help them cross the stream. Luz Maria did not need it. She crossed with a firm step. She lifted the hem of her dress without losing her grace. Bruno looked at her. His face held something that could not be named. It was something between pride, tenderness, and rest. The name that cannot be erased was finally not a last name. It was a shared destiny. It was a reconstructed story. It was her. It was him. It was everything they had achieved without asking the world's permission. The jacarandas continued to drop their silent blossoms onto the shoulders of the newlyweds. The San Remigio estate finally breathed completely. It was like one who knows that winter has passed. The morning dawned clear. There was not a cloud in the sky. The sun fell upon the San Remigio estate with that golden light that only appears on days when life decides to be generous. A soft breeze crossed the field. It made the branches laden with lilac flowers dance. They fell slowly from above. The air itself seemed to carry them to the ground. The jacarandas were in their splendor. From the gallery, the maids looked out discreetly. They watched as the wooden chairs were raised under the trees. They watched as the farmhands placed the light rug over the grass. They watched as linen ribbons were arranged among the bushes that marked the path to the improvised altar. There was no church or bell tower. Still, the atmosphere held a sacred solemnity. The news that Don Bruno Castañeda del Valle would marry outdoors on his own territory, with the woman the town had learned first to observe and then to respect, had spread through Santa Clara del Llano like the scent of rain on dry earth. Everyone came. Even those who claimed not to like celebrations came. Even those who had once looked down to avoid greeting her came. The former estate workers arrived. The women who learned to bake with Luz Maria arrived. The children who played in the corridors with the Count's daughters arrived. Some wore simple suits. Others wore inherited dresses, lovingly mended. But all wore expectant faces and curious hearts. Luz Maria left the house in silence. Her dress was the same as the chapel ceremony, but without the veil. She wore her hair up with wild flowers. In her hands she held a small bouquet of white dahlias and rosemary branches. She did not walk alone. A girl accompanied her on each side. Leonor was on one side. Josefina was on the other. Both wore crowns braided by their own hands. They held baskets with petals that they dropped as they advanced. The three walked toward the oldest tree on the domain. It was a wide-crowned jacaranda that looked like a sky of its own in spring. Bruno stood there. He was dressed with elegant sobriety. His eyes were fixed on them from the moment they appeared on the path. He did not say a word. He only held out his hand. Luz Maria took it. The priest, specially summoned to bless the union before God and the community, raised his voice. His speech was not what was moving. It was the silence with which everyone listened. It was the silent weeping of the townswomen. They understood, more than anyone, what that ceremony meant. It was the emotional gesture of the men who bowed their heads. They did not dare to look straight at this moment where dignity overcame lineage. Bruno took the floor. I lived surrounded by strong walls, but without comfort. I lived among valuable objects, but without a soul. Then she arrived. Luz Maria. She came not with adornments or promises. She came with bread in her hands. She came with dirt on her nails. She came with silence on her lips. His voice did not tremble, but his eyes did. Today, I promised to love her without demanding that she be like anyone else. I promised to respect her in what she keeps silent, in what she feels, and in what she has had to endure. I promised to honor her name. Today, that name joins mine. It does so not out of duty, but out of choice. Luz Maria pressed her lips together. The words pounded in her chest. I am not a countess, she said with a clear voice. I do not come from a lineage or a parlor school. I come from the oven, from the loom, from the field. But I am here with who I am. Her gaze rested on him. I learned to be a woman of the earth, of fire, and of truth. With that, I promise to care for him. I will do so not from a pedestal, but from the ground, from the home, from what is possible. The priest nodded. Before he could pronounce the closing, Leonore let out a nervous, joyful, now. She began to throw handfuls of petals over her parents. Josefina quickly followed her. The guests applauded timidly at first, then they clapped strongly. Finally, they clapped with emotion. Some cried, others laughed. Everyone knew they were witnessing something that did not happen every day. The banquet was simple. It was set on long tables under the trees. There was baked bread. There was fresh fruit. There were steaming stews. There were sweets prepared by the kitchen women. There was wine brought from the village store. There was no large band. There was only a string trio that accompanied the afternoon murmur with soft melodies. Bruno and Luz Maria did not dance at first. They sat together. They shared bites. They shared glances. They shared that secret language only known by those who have already chosen each other without words. Josefina approached at one point with a flower in her hand. Do we keep this in the quilt too? Luz Maria smiled. Yes, this too. When the sun began to set, the golden light once again covered the estate like a final embrace. Bruno took Luz Maria's hand. He led her toward the open field. The four of them walked together, him, her, and the girls. The children's laughter went ahead. The breeze collected the last petals of the day. They said nothing. They only walked among sown earth, strong roots, and wildflowers that bloomed where no one expected them to. Then the voice of the narration rose in silence. It was as if it spoke from the eternal. Where others saw ruin, she knew how to plant a root. There, in that previously withered soil, something bloomed that needed no name. Home. 5 years have passed since that day when the San Remigio estate blossomed beneath the flowering trees. Since then, the field has known new harvests. The rain has soaked the furrows again. The wind continues to bring with it the whispers of a story that does not fade. Time, as always, has taken its course. But some things that even the calendar cannot erase remain. In the central corridor of the house where silence once lived, the gallop of tiny feet is now heard. Matteo, the youngest son of Luz Maria and Bruno, is only 4 years old. He runs as if the world belongs to him. His dark, unruly hair gives him the look of a small hurricane. But his gaze, deep, clear, intense, is identical to his mother's when she arrived on this territory. He came without promises. Bruno, with some new gray hairs at his temples, sits in the afternoons under the oldest jacaranda. It was the one that witnessed his rebirth. His eyes are softer. His stride is slower. But when he takes Luz Maria's hand, he still does so with the same devotion as the first day. He no longer needs words to name her. He makes a call to her with gestures. He makes a call to her with his presence. He makes a call to her with the intact respect that is only earned with years lived truthfully. Leonore has become a cheerful young woman. She sings in the kitchen. She embroiders without obligation. She likes to read romantic novels and play with her little brother among the orchards. Josefina, on the other hand, has kept that quiet seriousness that characterizes her. But her heart has become less rigid. She now teaches the town children to read and write. She dreams of opening her own school someday. Luz Maria continues to bake bread. She does so not because she needs to. She knows the aroma of freshly baked bread can still mend sadness. Every Friday afternoon she takes a basket to the plaza. There the young women ask her about recipes. They ask her about looms. They also ask her about love, with more shyness. She does not boast. She only smiles gently. She tells them that love is not found. It is cultivated. In the town, things have also changed. Not completely. There are still those who whisper in the corners. There are still those who believe that lineage is the only thing that gives value to a name. But no one dares to look at Luz Maria with contempt anymore. History overcame custom. The dignity that she maintained from the first day left marks that time cannot erase. Doña Tadea, however, never smiled again. Since that night when Bruno revealed her betrayal before everyone, her place in society slowly crumbled. She no longer hosts afternoon teas or receives godmothers in her parlor. She lives in a large but empty house. She is surrounded by portraits that no one looks at anymore. She pays dearly for the price of a sharp tongue that did not. He knew when to be silent. There are words which, when thrown with poison, end up poisoning the person who speaks them. And the estate. The estate. San Remigio is now more than a property. It is a place where the territory is worked with respect. It is where laughter sounds louder than silent prayers, and where every jacaranda that blooms reminds us that beauty can be born from brokenness. That day, Mateo found a fallen flower next to the trunk of the oldest tree. He carried it to his mother with eyes bright with feeling. "Mother," he said, "this flower is yours." Luz Maria knelt down. She took it gently and looked at him. She saw that life is renewed in the simplest gestures. "No, my love," she said. "That flower belongs to all who know how to wait." And she hugged him tight. It was as if she were also embracing the woman she once was, the one who no longer exists, and the woman who still walks beside her every day. She didn't know that although time passes and days change, some stories do not end. They only transform into roots. And in the jacaranda's shadow, where everything began, a family continues to grow. Not with titles, not with crests, but with truth and with a love that knew how to endure. Luz Maria was not a storybook heroine. She was a common woman. She had worked hands and a quiet soul. She arrived at a place that did not expect her, and she transformed it. She did not use scandals. She did not use titles. She used her strength, her tenderness, and her unbroken dignity. This story reminds us that you do not need a surname to deserve respect. You do not need wealth to inspire love. Sometimes the greatest act of bravery is staying on your feet when others expect you to fall. Life does not always reward quickly, but it never forgets those who plant with truth. Perhaps you also, like Luz Maria, have sometimes felt that you do not fit in. Perhaps the world looks at you without truly seeing. Perhaps your silences weigh more than your words. But remember this: the most beautiful flowers grow after the longest rains, and true loves, the ones that last, are not perfect. They are the ones that endure the storm together. If this story touched your heart, tell me about it in the comments. What part made you tear up? Which character did you most identify with? And if you have reached this far, this last breath of the telling, write the word Jacaranda in the comments. This is how I will know you are one of those who value the profound, the authentic, the things that leave a mark. I invite you to discover other equally moving stories. I am leaving them for you in the cards. They are tales that also speak of love, of overcoming, and of that light that never goes out when it is born from the soul. Thank you for staying with me until the end. And remember, where others see ruin, you can plant hope.